This is my favorite quote. I've had more trouble with myself than with any other man I have ever met. How many of you can relate to that quote? In fact, this quote is so important to me that I have it taped above my computer screen on my wall so that I see it every day. What makes it that important to me? Because I need a constant reminder of how much trouble I have with myself if I'm not aware of who I am and how I'm going to act throughout the day. Let me give you an example of the trouble I can be in if I don't pay attention to those things. I want to take you to a courtroom in the city of Chicago, November 19th, 1995. I'm standing in front of a federal court judge who's getting ready to sentence me to 7 years in prison. Lots of trouble that I caused myself. And we're going to come back to that courtroom in a few minutes. I'm Paul Glover, Ewing's executive coach, and welcome to my presentation, Everyone Needs a Fool in Their Life. Now, the title of this presentation demands some explanation. And let me tell you why it's titled the way it is. What is a fool? Well, the concept of the fool is actually from the mid-ages, because kings were appointed, selected by divine right. This means that God had selected the king. And because God was infallible, anyone who questioned a decision made by the king committed the crime of heresy. And heresy was penalized by death. But while everyone knew that God was infallible, everyone also knew that the king was not. He was a human being who made mistakes. The conundrum was how to tell the king he was making a mistake and not get your head cut off. The solution to this problem was the fool. Now, when we see a picture of the fool, we think the fool was an entertainer, someone who sat at the foot of the king's throne and periodically got up, did a little dance, sang a little song, told a joke to make the king laugh. That was not the role of the fool. Because the fool acting the way he did, dressed like that, was seen as crazy, he escaped the rules that would have had him executed for telling the truth. Crazy people were not responsible for what they said. If they weren't responsible, he could not be held accountable. Therefore, the fool was able to tell the king the truth about the decisions they were making. So the fool actually was a trusted advisor. And that role of the fool counterbalanced the king's divine right for 1,500 years. And I believe that we need fools in our lives today as much as the kings needed fools in their lives, to help us when we are making bad decisions, to recognize and give us the gift of truth when we're engaged in bad behavior. And my bad behavior just about got ready to start. My modern day definition of a fool that we need in our lives is a person you can trust who cares enough about you to tell you the truth about you. Think about that. Think about how important it is to have someone in our lives who will perform that act of giving us the gift of truth about us. Okay, we'll go on. Now, You may find that to be interesting, but you also may not be too interested in its application to you. So let me tell you that my personal experience is going to support what I believe you should be looking for, and that's a fool in your life. I needed a fool. I needed someone who was going to tell me the truth about the bad behavior, the bad decisions, my poor choice of friends and associates that took me to that courtroom. But prior to January 19th, 1995, I would have said, I don't need a fool. I'm absolutely in control of myself and my behavior. I'm choosing to do what I want to do because I'm the smartest guy in the room. On that day, January 19th, I woke up as a successful trial attorney in the city of Chicago. I practiced criminal, employment, and labor law. When I went to bed 12 hours later, I'd been indicted by a federal court jury on 33 counts of taking bribes, kickbacks, and tampering with government witnesses. 10 months later, 2 trials later, I was standing in front of that federal court judge I opened with, who did sentence me to 7 years in prison because I had been found guilty by a jury of the crimes that I'd been charged with. And by the way, I was guilty. I make no bones about it. I served that time, and through the serving of that time, discovered something about me, that I needed a fool in my life, that I was not capable, because of my blind spots, of being able to make the decisions correctly. And I believe that everyone in this room, even though you don't make the same level of bad decisions that I did that's going to put you in prison, or at least I hope you don't, still needs a fool in your life. Because everyone has blind spots. And those blind spots are called that because we cannot see them. Examples of blind spots are ego, a need to belong, a need for approval, a lack of empathy. And with every blind spot comes a trigger. The trigger is the behavior, even a word, that will activate your blind spot. And that blind spot recognizes a need that needs to be fulfilled. One of my biggest blind spots was I needed to belong. I wanted to be part of a group. And because of my law practice, as well as my personality, and for those who don't know, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I practice trial law because of the buzz. And when I wasn't trying a case, I still wanted the buzz. I was addicted. And because of my client base, I started associating with bad people. Really bad people. I was a bad guy wannabe. To belong to that group required that I do certain things, behave in a certain way. And obviously, when you're hanging around with bad guys, what they want you to do are bad things. And I committed those crimes, those bad things, because I wanted to belong. I needed that group. I needed their approval. That was my blind spot. And the triggers were, if you want to be a part of the group, this is what you have to do to be part of the group. So understand how it goes. We have a blind spot, and we have triggers. The triggers activate the blind spot, and we then try to fulfill the need that the blind spot provides for us. It may be approval. I need approval, therefore I will do what is necessary to get that approval. By the way, we all see that. We all may actually engage in that practice, only because we see people who do bad things and good things. They'll do either one if they get approval. Children will do that to get attention and approval. When you're a teenager, you will do whatever is necessary to belong to the group that you want to be a part of, won't you? Yes, of course you will. You don't want to stand out. You want that group. You need to belong to that group, and you will do the behavior that that group wants from you so that you can be a part of that group. Now, we all have those blind spots, whatever they may be. And I would suggest to you that first you believe you have blind spots. So, how strong are blind spots? Obviously, I committed crimes. But as I stood in front of that federal court judge, who I knew was getting ready to sentence me to 7 years in prison, he offered me an opportunity to reduce my sentence. And by the way, this was a judge that I'd practiced law in front of. He was not happy. And he said, Mr. Glover, first, you are one of the few people that have stood in front of me that if I could give you more time, I would. Lovely. Needless to say, I was sweating. And he said, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to reduce your sentence by 1.5 years. There are only 2 conditions. The first is you must publicly admit that you committed the crimes that you've been found guilty of. And the second, you must give the federal prosecutor information about the other people who participated in committing those crimes. Wait a minute. Those guys were part of my group. Well, hell, do I look like I'm stupid? I'm going to take 1.5 years reduction, aren't I? No. I stood in front of the judge and said, I will not admit that I committed those crimes. Now think about this. A jury has already found me guilty. I'm going to go to prison. And yet my ego would not permit me to admit that I was guilty. And the second thing is, because of that affiliation, that blind spot that I had to belong was so strong that the group I belonged to, those criminals who had participated in the criminal acts that I was going to jail for, and they weren't, I would not allow them to go through that process. I would not give that information to the federal court judge or to the prosecutor. Is that stupid? Well, let me tell you, my wife thought so. 1.5 years I got to spend in prison without being with my family. But let me tell you that the example I use is so that you understand how strong these blind spots are and how they can impact your behavior. And what you have to do to make sure that they don't take control of your behavior because you can't see the blind spot is you need to find a fool. I spent the first 2 years of my prison sentence plotting revenge on all those people that I thought had put me in prison. But after 2 years, I realized that I had put me in prison. And I also realized how much I had damaged my family. I left my family financially destitute. I had spent all of our savings, my son's college funds, and put a second mortgage on the house, all in a vain attempt not to go to jail for crimes I'd committed. But even worse was the emotional devastation. None of those people knew, none of my family knew, my wife, my sons, my friends, my community, none of them knew that I was a criminal. When you're found guilty and you're going to go to jail, everybody knows. The fact that they survived my self-destructive behavior is a miracle. What's even a greater miracle is they allowed me to remain a member of the family. But that only occurred because I realized after 2 years in prison that I was responsible for my self-destructive behavior, and that if I didn't change, I was going to lose my family, but probably even worse, I would get out, commit the same crimes or similar crimes, and go back to prison. That's why recidivism in prison is 80%. People don't change. They commit the crime, they get out, they go, and they go back to prison because they haven't realized their blind spots. They haven't taken the action necessary to control their actions based on understanding, seeing their blind spots and the triggers. I made the decision that I was not going to do that. 2 years it took me to reflect. I'm a very slow learner. 2 years in prison, finally, I recognized that I needed help. I needed someone that cared enough about me that I could trust to tell me the truth, to identify my blind spots. And I looked and I found my fools. So, who did I find? My wife. She's the one that suffered most because of my self-destructive behavior. Also my closest friend. And I asked him to do a hard thing. Tell me the truth about me. Give me the gift of truth. And that is a hard ask, because anyone who knows me and knows my personality understands how hard it is for me to accept criticism. And I actually had a slide taken from a few good men that said, what was the famous one? I want the truth. And the answer is, you can't handle the truth. And the reality is that if you want the truth from someone, if you want to ask somebody that you value, who you know will tell you the truth, you have to want it. If you don't want it, don't ask. Because they know that normally you're going to have an adverse reaction, aren't you? Do we really want to know the truth about ourselves? Did I have a choice? No, I did not. You do. I was sitting in a prison, and I recognized this had to be something I did. You all still have a choice. First, you ask them. Then you give them permission. You need to give your fools the psychological safety necessary so they will tell you the gift, give you the gift of truth. And you have to make sure that they believe that, because you have to believe it. Give them permission. Then you have to do a harder thing. You have to listen. Don't you hate to listen when somebody's telling you something you don't want to hear? Oh my God, I can remember sitting in the visiting room. And I've asked my wife a specific issue about my behavior because it obviously was wrong. It was bad. How could I avoid the truth of that? The question was why? Why was I like that? And you don't know my wife, but believe me, she'd been waiting. She'd been waiting for the opportunity. And she deserved it. She deserved the opportunity, and I needed it. And the second part of that, I listened. The second part, I didn't become defensive. I was prepared to take a breath. So when someone you value tells you the truth, don't get defensive. Don't do that knee-jerk reaction about, I don't believe you. You must be wrong. How could you say that about me? Because if you trust them and you care about them, and you believe they care about you, they're giving you a gift. Then you have to do something harder. You have to thank them for doing this hard thing. So seldom do we thank people for doing the hard things in our life. And the reality is this is one of the hardest things, because they're waiting for you not to accept what they have to say. So you thank them, you profusely thank them, you tell them how much you appreciate them in your life. You thank them and you tell them how much you value them, how much you love them, how much you want them to stay with you. Then you reflect. Because without reflection, knowledge does not matter. You must think about what you've been told. You must take the time to reflect on your behavior, connect it to the blind spots, understand your triggers. They've given you valuable information. What you do with it is up to you. The fool has provided you with what you need. And you know what this leads to? It leads to change. This is how you change. These 7 things are extraordinarily difficult, but they're extraordinarily necessary if, in fact, you are prepared to change, to get better, to actually validate the effort the fool has given you. Now, there are some people sitting in every audience that I give this presentation to that I know that they don't believe they need a fool, because I didn't. I certainly did not. If I'd heard this presentation, I would have said in 1995, bullshit. That's not me. I know me. I'm in charge of me. I control my actions. I can justify my actions. So I can only tell you that if you don't believe you need a fool in your life, you have the biggest blind spot of all. And finally, there's an obligation that goes when you've been given a fool. When you have a fool in your life, you're fortunate enough to have a fool in your life, your obligation is to become a fool. Find a person that you love. Find a person you care about, that you see as engaged in destructive behavior, and give them the gift of truth. Because everyone needs a fool in their life. Thank you.